Oh, yo, what's happening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages? It is your hostess with the mostest. It's PKR, Pastor Keenan Riley, and we are here back live with another episode of People Suck, Love Them Anyways. Hopefully, we are dropping two in a row without technical difficulties. If all goes well today. So, and not only that, we are here to celebrate today Nick's coming out party. That he
Whoa,
is.
whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on.
That he is. He said today that he has broken the chains of oppression in his life, that there is no longer a darkness that resides over him, but today he is walking forth to the light. The Eeyore is behind him.
The light
and
of Eeyore.
the darkness of Eeyore is behind him. No longer will he
We
be
are leaving
stuck.
the Eeyore era and
Yes.
entering the Tigger era.
Yes, that's it, man. Entering the Tigger era. That's probably going to be the name of it today. So what changed,
Bouncing
man?
around.
Let's talk about that. What changed? What happened? What transpired? What took place? What shifted? What was the momentum? What happened exactly that you were just like, I'm going to come over to the side of light. I'm going to come over to the inspirational, motivational, transformational side of things.
I mean, I don't know if if you say it was any any specific thing. It's just kind of been, I guess, I've been in this place, where, I've been more motivational, inspirational, joyful, positive, whatever you want to call
have?
it. I have before.
Where?
When?
I don't know. 2017.
Oh, God, no. That was much worse then.
You were like 12.
No, I wasn't that young. It's just one of those things, it's one of those things when you had enough, you've had enough, and it's just time for something. Again, it's kind of like what we talked about last week. It's all about making that decision, being intentional. And if you don't make steps or make strides in the right direction, you're going to keep falling back in the wrong direction. And,
so last week's podcast helped you. Here we are trying to help people, and it helped you. You know what I mean?
Sure. Sure. But I mean, it's just one of those things. Like I know, like I hope other people do. When you're in that moment, when you're in that, and it's time or whatever you want to call it. You have to either, you have to make a decision. You're either going to live and wallow in it, or you're going to let it wash over you, or you're going to actually take the reins. Because it's one of those things that you can't. Positivity doesn't happen by accident. Cynicism does. Negativity does.
Mm-hmm.
It happens to you. Positivity is a choice. I mean, I think there are some people who are naturally more positive. That just wake up in the morning happy, joyful, and ready to go no matter what's going on. I think of that guy from, I know you probably haven't watched, but there's a show on Netflix called Love on the Spectrum. And one of the it's not really a contestant, but one of the autistic individuals that's trying to find love in that show is the embodiment of positivity. The dude is just so happy and joyful. And,
well, you have to. I feel like you have to work. It's so much easier just to be negative, and I think we talked about that a little bit last week about how it's just, you can always find something negative, but it's like whenever you rewire your mind and you gear your mind towards that positive side. In a dark world right now, it is probably harder, to find something great to talk about or great to talk about your day or whatever the case is. But it's like those moments and instances are still there. You just have to find them. You just got to work a little bit harder. And that's the reason why I think that you meet so many depressed, anxious, angry, frustrated, broken people out there, is because they have this mindset of they're walking through the day and it's like it seems like everything compounds on top of each other, and it's a snowball effect. And when and it's like, oh, I'm just having a bad day, I'm having a bad day, and it's like, well, you probably woke up with a mindset this morning going, I'm going to have a bad day today. Whenever you had that conversation with yourself, like you got up and you were just like, you were dreading the day. And so, it's just, I don't know, man. Like I have been myself on both sides of the spectrum of being like that, that negative pessimist, like just always finding something deep, dark, frustrating, whatever. And then I've been on the other side of the spectrum where I'm like, hey, can't nothing hold me back, can't nothing hold me down. And it's like it really is, the conversation that you have with yourself before you get out of bed in the morning. It's like, what are you going to do today? If you dread your job, you're going to hate everything leading up to your job. You know what I mean? Like you're going to hate your home life because your job is burdening you so
Mhm.
much, you're gonna let it spill over into your home.
Amen.
And yeah, and then it's like your car ride. It's gonna spill
Mhm.
over into your car ride on the way to work. And so like, if somebody cuts you off, or if somebody's going too slow, or if somebody like, then it's going to spill over there. And then you get to work and you hate work,
Mhm.
and then it's like you carry it back home with you or wherever
It's
you
just a
may go.
never-ending cycle.
It is, right. It is. But
Yeah.
it does start with that conversation that you have with yourself in the morning. Like, it's like, what kind of day are you going to have? And I think last week we talked a lot about like, like what you can control and what you can, be a part of. And really like you can't control what transpires in a day, but you can control how you react to it.
Mhm.
And if you wake up in the morning with that mindset of it's going to be a terrible day, well then I promise you're going to find what you're looking for. It's going to be a terrible day. You're right.
Mhm.
You're right. No matter what you do, no matter where you go, like if you have the mindset of being terrible and you won the lottery, you would be like, oh great, I've got all this money
I
now.
gotta pay taxes
Yeah,
on it.
yeah, exactly. It's like I got to pay taxes now. Everybody, like nobody's going to
Everybody's
leave me
gonna bust in
alone.
front of me.
Exactly. Like and so it's like, bro, you just won $250 million and you've taken it and turned it negative.
Mhm.
So it's like,
Some people do turn it negative. I
oh,
don't
well,
know
yeah, that's
how. I don't
true.
know how
Yeah,
they do it.
shout
Maybe.
out to that dude in Kentucky that just
Yeah.
won and got arrested the
Right.
next day, like
Yeah.
for
Just losing
real.
all his money in one
Yeah,
time.
that's insane. But I am glad, man, to hear that you are working, progressing that way, trying to take steps in the right direction to really just to change
Mhm.
the mindset. Because I mean it, no matter, man, whenever you get to the other side of it and the mindset's different, it doesn't matter what transpires, and it's just like whenever you
Mhm.
see that, it's like your whole. I'm not going to say like the day doesn't change, but your perspective does. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, ultimately, I was in that cycle, where it's kind of like things are constantly, always focused in on the bad, zoned in on the bad, however you want to say that. But
Mhm.
it's kind of like you said, I was, basically this I kind of all started because I've been dreading it for a while, and going back and forth, asked my current job for raise, didn't get what I'd asked for, and so in that moment I decided to follow the wonderful advice of you and others to put my 30-day notice in
There you
without
go.
anything lined up.
There you
And
go.
this is one of those God things, that it's either going to turn out horrible or God's going to come through like He always does. And
Yeah.
so it's one of those things that you sometimes it takes that drastic leap of faith,
Yeah.
step of faith, sometimes to kind of shake you out of this cycle that you're in.
Mhm.
And I told my wife, I told you all, I was like, in that moment when I heard the words no, like you're not getting that, and I
Yeah.
decided that okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
It was in that exact moment that I felt peace.
Yeah.
And it's something I've been fighting against for so long. It's like I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't have something. Again, like we always say, putting earthly sense to a godly thing.
Right.
I'm sitting there trying to like, it wouldn't make sense to do this, but it feels like what I need to do. Tune in for a month from now. We'll see where I'm at.
Yeah.
But I
The
do.
beard's grown out, the
Yeah.
hair's grown out. You hadn't showered in 2 weeks.
Look like Seth Rogen at the
Yeah,
beginning of COVID.
you're
just
sleeping.
like,
You're sleeping
hair
underneath
going
the pews
crazy.
here at church. That type of situation. But to me, isn't it crazy though that like, see, this is what I'm talking about, the mindset shift and flip. Like, for us, the simple thing is we would think that if we heard yes in that situation, that it would be freeing. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? But in this instance, because you flipped your mindset, the no was actually a peaceful no. It was like, hi, like
But
I
it's
have
one of those
peace. I
things.
have peace about this.
It's one of those things that I like. God throws so many things at you. Yeah, it's kind of like you got you got my wife, you got everybody else that I talk to that tell me that this is obviously not a good situation and I need to get
Mhm.
out of this situation.
Mhm.
And I kind of wait and wait and wait and put it off. And I feel like Gideon a little bit, where it's like, God, give me a sign, and God's like, I've given you how many signs
7,
to say
and
to
you're
do
still
this.
here.
But it's one of those things where you kind of give way to God's, you kind of give way to your faith in God and what He
Mhm.
can do and what He's going to do.
Yeah.
When you finally relinquish control and you put yourself in a vulnerable situation and vulnerable state where the only
Mhm.
thing you can do but trust God,
Yeah.
is when you kind of feel that shift a little bit, and like I said, it's been one of those things, that I feel like I've physically held on to for so long that physicality of holding on to something that isn't good for you, that it's time to move on from. I think of it like, when you're in a toxic relationship with somebody and you finally let go of that person and you see what life is like on the other side of it, and there's just this wave of relief.
Mm.
And again, there's still, I mean, again, just to be blatantly honest, if there are anybody listening that keeps up with me in my life and everybody else that's involved with the podcast, but if it's one of those things, like I don't have something lined up.
Yeah.
I'm taking a leap of faith here, believing in faith that God
Mm-hmm.
will provide something better, than what I currently have. A lot of people would look at that as stupid. I know I did.
Yeah.
I looked at it as stupid for a long time. That's why I fought against it for so long. But again, it's just one of those things where, things just kind of get thrown at you and thrown at you and thrown at you, and to the point where you're like, if I keep saying no, then God's going to be like, well, fine.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of crazy because, like, and this is something I'm going to preach about later tonight, but or try to teach about anyways. But I truly believe everything happens for a reason. I really do. So it seems like no matter what time I leave for work in the morning, I get there at the same time. It's like really weird. I don't know what do they call it? Is that like the butterfly effect or something? Or yeah, it's
the
like
Santa Claus effect.
Yeah, it's something. It's some kind of effect. But I'm like, man, I feel like I'm running way behind, and then sometimes I'm like way early, but I still get there at the same time. It's really weird. But nonetheless, this morning, I usually try to start my YouTube videos, my motivational videos, and listen to them while I have service. And then I go through some spotty areas where I may not have service. So this morning it was late, and so I didn't get the video to play, and until I was like, I don't know, 10 minutes outside of work or something. And I was like, by now I was like, whatever, so I didn't even play it. But I got to thinking about tonight. I got to thinking about what I'm reading about and what I'm talking about tonight, and about how a lot of times that whenever God speaks to us, it sounds stupid to other people. I'm glad that you were like, yeah, it sounded stupid just to quit my job when I don't have things lined up. But, I got to thinking about David and how, the Israelite army was going out to Goliath every day and listening to Goliath talk trash and all of this good stuff. And, basically from that moment, like they would just run back and forth to the camp, and they were scared, and they would come out and repeat the same process every day. And then one day you have David, who walks out past them with no sword, no shield, no armor, no nothing. He walks past them out into the battle lines and kills this giant. And I guarantee you, while he's walking past this army, they're like, look at this fool. like look at this fool. Like, what is this dude about to do? Like, he's going to get killed. Exactly. Like, and it got me to thinking about how God speaks to everyone differently in different situations. I got to thinking about Forrest Frank, a real big Christian artist right now. He was telling a little bit of a testimony. I'll go into it in a little bit, but it's kind of the same thing. But how, like, God speaks to us so differently about things, and what he speaks to you may be totally different and off the wall to what he would tell me or have me to do. And I think one of the trip effects, if you want to call it that we have in Christianity is that we are more influenced by people rather than by God.
Mm-hmm.
We're more influenced by, a group of people. And I'm not saying that, that we're like right or wrong for telling you to quit your job. I want you to quit your job because that's what God wants you to do. I want you to rely more on God than you do that income per year. And then, or I want you to rely more on God for your happiness and your flow of income versus a job. You know what I mean? So, it's like, but for us, it's like, what does that look like? And you quitting that job, and then some people might look and go, you don't have nothing lined up, and well, God wouldn't do that. God is a provider, and
God
like,
gives you wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. Like type situation. And that is exactly the thought process I was having this morning. And I got to thinking about that, about how a lot of times, like, God will just tell you, we put God in a box because we think that because God worked this way one time, that God's going to work this way every time. And it's like God is the same. God is consistent, but the modes and the methods that God uses changes up and rearranges daily. Sometimes by the second. It just depends on what God wants to use. And for us, we have to get out of that mindset where we're easily influenced or convicted by people to do something, where it's like we totally have to rely upon God. Like, stay if it doesn't make sense. If God's telling you stay, stay. If God's telling you to go, go. If God's telling you work, work. If God's telling you take a nap, like whatever. Like, it depends on what God is telling you to do. And I think we just have a problem today in society where we don't know the voice of God because we would rather listen to the voice of people instead, because people will rationalize things. People will, oh, well, you need to, oh man, a job. Oh my God, I would be freaking out right now. You don't have a job. There's 28 days left. Well, God made the world in 6, so it's like, you think he can't find a job in 28? Calm down, Martha. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got to back it up a little bit. Like, that's where I think faith level wise, and I think really just getting into that relationship with God, it's like where things are not going to make sense, but that is where faith steps in at and says, hey, look, like, it may not make sense to anybody, but watch God do what God does.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy because like, I'll think back, as I was, contemplating this decision and talking to people, after I was told no, and I was about to, I said by the end of the day, I was going to talk to some people, pray about it, all that kind of stuff. And so like as I was kind of making the decision and talking about after making the decision, it just like, sometimes we can get so stuck in situations that we forget what God's done before.
Yeah.
And I was like, cause I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, obviously, I mean, how I felt. I mean, if you listen to last week's episode, you know how I felt, but it's like, I know that this job was draining me. It was making me irritable.
It was draining me.
It was draining everybody around me. It was draining everybody around me. But, it's one of those things that I'm like, why would God?
I threatened to cut you out of the group chat. I was like, this guy's got to get in the chat by himself, man. Like, it's killing me. Yeah.
But it's just like one of those things, like it's hard in the moment because, like I said, I try to rationalize it. I'm like, I'm miserable, but God, it's like that thing where it's like, I don't know the difference between taking a leap of faith and using the wisdom that God gave me. Because it's like, I'm sitting here rationalizing. I'm like, if I'm trying to be wise, then this would not be a wise decision to make. I need to not make a rash decision because I'm emotional, because I'm angry, because I'm short-tempered, because I'm this, that, or the other, and so wisdom would tell me not to do that. Wisdom saying don't do that, but faith is like, obviously, I think you maybe even made a post the other day where it's like, if it's taking you farther away from God, then it's not from God.
Right.
But and it's like that mindset where it's like, obviously, my faith has been really low lately. I've been very angry, been very frustrated, been very short with people. I've not been very Jesus-like. I know that to my kids, to anybody around me, like I know that. And so like, I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, if I were to leave, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, it may seem unwise on the outside, but obviously I feel like it would be me doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And because like, I mean, and I have to remind myself of in the past, both times in my life that I've been jobless, whether, one place I was laid off, the other place I was told, to basically find something else. But both of those times in my life, God has provided. I remind myself of that. Like the first time I was laid off from a job at FYE, it was a little movie music store in the mall in our local town. That store shut down. They shut the whole store down and laid us off. And I was, of course, first time in my life I've ever been laid off. I was pretty young at the time, but I was like, no, what am I going to do? And then God gave me, I always wanted to work at GameStop. God made me an assistant manager at GameStop. I didn't even have to be a general associate. Like I was assistant manager at GameStop. And so, I loved that job. It was very fun, all that kind of stuff. Love talking to people about stuff that I'm passionate about and love doing. But, then the second time that I was laid off from a job, like I basically, I forget about how much of a blessing it was. I think I was because I always give you and Julie crap for telling me to take the job in the first place. But
yeah.
But like it's funny because like I always see it so negative. But I think I was having a conversation with my wife last night and we talked about actually the positives in it. I was like, yeah, like it wasn't a great job. It didn't pay well. It hurt us financially. But at the end of the day, I took that job and I was given paid time off in between my next job, which during that time was when my wife had our son. So I got to spend time with him right after being born and my wife and help her out. And I was like, that's a time in life that a lot of people don't get.
Right.
I was getting paid to do that. To be at home, I was, I was able to go to the gym. I was able to, take care of myself a little bit better physically. And then I was given a job that, that I was wanting. You know, I prayed to God for the job. I know it's always crazy. Everybody's like, you know, that time when you hate going into a job that you once prayed for God to give to you.
Yeah.
But you know, and it's funny because like, you know, I was given a great job that, you know, it helped me make more money than I ever made before. And, you know, it helped set me up to, you know, get our house and all these other things. But, you know, it's just one of those things that I had to remind myself of. I know it's a very long way to get to where I'm going, but you know, that God, even though it didn't make sense, even though it was scary, God still took care of me. God still provided, which is where I think, you know, I put that song on Facebook this morning that I heard that God will provide. I think was the name of the song. I can't remember right off the top of my head. But talking about how, you know, God won't leave us empty handed. Like God will take care of us. God will provide for us, you know, and that, you know, my Father has it, you know, my Father will take care of it, you know, and those words in that song, you know, just remind me that, you know, I sit there, you know, a couple times, you know, the past couple days where I'm just like, it's funny how anxious you can get, you know, because I'm sitting there, I'm like, yeah, I think what you just said, you know, God made the whole world in, you know, 6 days, and I'm sitting there thinking like it's day, you know, I've got 29 days left of my notice, I've got 28 days left of my notice, I don't have something yet, I need something to work, I need something,
Yeah,
I need something to happen.
2, and you're like,
Yeah.
where are you at, God?
Yeah, like I need it to happen, but again,
Yeah.
I have to remind myself like, calm down, you still got God. I'm reminded a lot of that story with like Samuel and Saul, where it's like I said I would be there at the end of the week.
7 days.
7 days, I'll be there.
7 days.
And Saul is like, nope, I got to take control of the situation. And so it's hard to not take control of that situation, you know, not freak out, not let your circumstances scare you,
right,
like Saul did in that situation, not let the people around you deter you and scare you like Saul did in that situation, but to wait for God to come through at the end of that 7th day.
Yeah.
Because he said I'd be there in 7 days.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, that it's like, it's so important to have that, again, that mindset of people around you, you know, where it's like you got to have those people that are always encouraging and always praying and always, you know, and things like that. I was reminded of a good story. I heard the late great Phil Robertson tell a story the other day, just about God's provision and timing. And of course, I mean, he's, you know, since gone on to be with the Lord and all that good jazz. But he was telling a story about how he had a bank note, and it was $600. And this was before Duck Commander. This was before, like, you know, it blew up and all that good stuff. And had a bank note of $600, and they couldn't pay it. And he was like, man, he said, I prayed. What's his wife's? I can't remember his wife's name, but he called her Miss something, whatever her name is. And you know, and he said she was worried and she was crying, and she was like, you know, I don't know, you know, how we're gonna pay this. And he said, you know, he said, I don't know. He's like, let me pray about it. And he's like, I prayed about it, and he said, I went down to the bank and talked to him, tried to extend some payments out, and he's like, they wouldn't even let me do that, you know. And he's like, so I had 30 days to come up with $600, you know. And he said, I prayed about it, and he said it was the last day. He said, this is no joke. He's like, I'm just telling you. He's like, and I still get chills telling this story. He said, but he said it was the last day. It was the morning of, and he said, as I was praying the night before, he said, I woke up that morning, and he said, I just felt like God told me to go to the mailbox, you know, go to the mailbox. And he said, as I was walking out to the mailbox, he said, Miss, whatever her name is, he said, she yelled at me and said, what are you doing? And he said, God told me to go to the mailbox. And she's like, are you crazy? She's like, there's not going to be, like, there's no check in there. Like, what is wrong with you? And he said, I opened up the mailbox, and he said it was a letter. It was like an envelope, and it was addressed, or it had Bank of Tokyo on it. And he said, I held it up to the sunlight, and he said, I didn't even open it. He said, I held it up, and he said, I could see that it was a check inside of it. And he said, I motioned forward to come over, and he said, I opened it up and looked, and he said it was a check for prepaid, that they wanted so many duck calls, and it was for $610. And he said, you know, he said, I even looked at her and said, well, you got $10 to spare, you know, like, you know, and you know, he was like, he said, I couldn't explain it. And he said, don't ask me to explain it. Besides the fact of that God works in mysterious ways, God knows our needs, and God provided, you know. But it's just like, for us, it's like we work on our time limit. We work on our time frame. And, you know, so it's like you know, there's a lot of us that wouldn't even have waited that 30 days. We would have waited for 15. And if nothing happened, we would have been trying to find $600 somewhere. And, you know, and going, hey, look, like, do you have 600? Can I borrow 600? Can I do this? Can I do that? And a lot of times God is just, I hate to say this, but like God is really putting you to the test sometimes. It's like you say you have faith. You say you're connected. You say that you're my child. But let me put a little time crunch on you. Let me put a little time frame on you.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like when that time frame starts getting real tight, you're like, man, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. I don't know what to do. And it's like, are you going to trust or are you going to
Mm-hmm.
bow out to something that makes sense to you? You
Yeah,
know?
and it's crazy because like as you're saying that, I'm thinking here, I was like, that at the end of this, like when God provides another job, like this is going to be such a testimony.
Yeah. Oh
It's
yeah.
just like one of those things that again, I know it's hard to think about in the moment. When you're fighting the fear and the impatience and all
Hmm.
those sorts of
Hmm.
things. But like I think a faith statement, is that this is going to be a testimony. This is going to lead to a testimony.
Yeah.
God's going to provide, even though I don't understand it, even though it doesn't make sense, even though it may not be quote unquote wise,
Hmm.
that God is going to use this time as a testimony. One day I'm going to be able to say, God, I felt like I needed to quit my job, put a 30-day notice in without anything lined up, and God still took care of me. God gave me a job. God gave me something better than I even thought I would get.
Right.
I know one day that's going to be that testimony that I'm going to be able to look back and say and talk about and share and encourage others with. Like I said, because God has provided time and time and time and time and time and time again. He's answered prayers time and time and time again. And I like you said, it's that matter of, do you really have faith or not? Do you really trust me or not? And I think sometimes we get a little too comfortable as a Christian. Like we say we have faith, but we don't really have anything in our lives that's testing us.
Right.
And so I think it's important to kind of do that from time to
Yeah.
time. Make those decisions, do something that's going to really test your faith in God, and do something silly. I remember a pastor at my parents' church when I was going there a long time ago. He talked about, he's like, we got our house and all this stuff, and we this is the weirdest thing of all, but we really needed one of those little things you twirl up a hose, like a garden hose with,
Like a
like you crank it and it like
yeah, yeah,
wraps it
yeah.
up.
Yeah, I know what you're
Yeah,
saying.
he's like, it's really crazy. He's like, we really needed one. We really couldn't afford to go buy one, but we really needed one. And he's like, I know it was really weird, but God, I think his wife maybe even said, I think we need to pray about it. I think we need to pray that God will provide one
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
And he's like, that seems silly. He's like, it's
Yeah.
just a dumb little hose thing. He said, but you know what? We'll do it. So they
Right.
prayed about it. I think it was about a week, and at the end of that week, down on their road, someone set one out by the garbage
Yeah.
that they didn't need anymore.
Yeah.
And so like they would grab it and took it home. And he's like, God provided. It was a silly thing. It was a silly prayer request, but God rewarded our faith in Him to provide something as simple and silly as that.
Yeah, this was back, man, for me, like this was back years ago. And I can remember, we were struggling financially. And there was a church that had asked me to come and preach I think it was a Sunday evening service. And I was like, sure. I was like, I'll come. And then, man, I mean, like I was almost out of gas. And like I looked at the bank account and I was like, we didn't even have enough money to put in the gas tank. And I can remember my wife and I like scraping together dollar bills, quarters, like anything that I could find. And literally had enough gas to get to the church. I mean, it was like a church that was like 30, 35 minutes away. Had enough gas to get to the church that night and luckily to get back home. But while I was preaching that night, after I got done preaching, the pastor just come up and stood beside him and he said, you know what? He said, and he knew nothing, like, he knew nothing about, my outside of, he knew me, but he didn't
Mm-hmm.
know situations and stuff like that. But the Lord just laid it on his heart. He's like, man, he's like, I was sitting there and he's like, I just felt, convicted to take up an offering, a love offering for you tonight, man. And I was like, that's just God, man. Like I could have easily called him and said, hey, I'm not feeling well, or hey,
Mm-hmm.
I got some really bad circumstances or whatever, could have chirped out. But, because we were obedient enough to scrounge and do and pick and like put things together, pay in dimes, nickels, quarters,
Mm-hmm.
whatever to get there, God provided for the next couple 3 days until I got paid again, and it was like it was just all about an obedience thing. And I know we referenced Forrest Frank earlier. Like I was listening to a little bit of a testimony he was given not too long ago, and this is what I was talking about, like God speaking in different ways that literally makes no sense. But He said he was driving one day and he felt like the Spirit of God was telling him to run out of gas.
Hmm.
You know, and like for us, we're like, no, that's stupid. That was the devil, you know, like that was the
That's
devil
not
telling
using the
you.
wisdom that
Yeah,
God
yeah,
gave
yeah,
you.
exactly. Like you passed up 7 gas stations. So he runs out of gas on this bridge. He goes back to the gas station. He has money. Like that's the crazy part. But whenever he goes into the gas station, there's this like 17, 18-year-old kid that offers him a ride. And as he gets to talking to him and gets to knowing him, he invites him over to the studio, cooks him supper, ends up like praying for him, man. This kid was demon possessed, like he couldn't even say the name of Jesus. Like, you know, like there was a spiritual deliverance and healing through that process. And they still stay in touch and in contact to this day, man. You know, and it's like, you know, for us, what looks so stupid. I mean, like what other people would say, you're stupid. Like
Mhm.
you ran out of gas and walked all the way back and all that good stuff. But it's like, look at the blessing. Look at what was in the middle of it. You know, just because you were
Mhm.
obedient, because you didn't care what it looked like to anybody else. And that's like one of the things, man. Like I've got a long way to go in a lot of places in my life, like a long way to go. But like one thing that I am supernaturally proud of, man, is the fact of that. Like I do not care what our ministry, what our church, what this podcast, what my posts, like I don't care what that stuff looks like to people. You know what I'm saying? Like as long as I'm doing it because God's telling me
Mhm.
to do it, and as long as God is in the middle of it, and as long as God is leading, God and directing me, I don't care, man. You know what I'm saying? Like it'll work out for God's glory one way or another, and I'm cool
Mhm.
with that. And again, I fall short in a lot of places in my life. Got a long way to go in a lot of places, but that is one area that I'm really, 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 you know,
Mhm.
proud of, to say that we've had a lot of growth in that over the years.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, when I of course made this decision, about my job and all that, like I think it was the day after, which was yesterday, after I put in the notice. Like my boss came in there to me today. I told you and
Mm-hmm.
Julia this earlier, but I was like, my boss came in there to yesterday morning and it was like, talking about how she's sad, she's gonna miss me and all this sort of stuff. But one thing that really stuck with me was, she said, she looked at me and she said, she's like, I don't really know what you got going on next. She's like, but I know that you put God first in everything that you do, and because of that, He's going to take care of you. You're going to be successful at anything you try to do.
Yeah.
And I was like, it was like she told me something that I knew, but I forgot.
Well, it's
It's
not
just
only
like,
that, but I feel like it's good to hear it. You
mm-hmm,
know, it's good to be. It's maybe it's not even the fact that you forgot it, but you just needed to be
mm-hmm,
reminded of it, if that
right.
makes sense. You know.
Yeah, and it was I think a little bit further again, even though I've got that little bit of that tinge of fear and anxiety, over what
Mm-hmm.
I'm facing. It was just that little bit of extra confirmation that God's got me.
Yeah.
And because there's been a lot of times in the last couple of weeks that I'm like, God, where's your favor at? Like God, where's your favor? Where's the blessings? Where's the joy? Where's this? That and the other.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, she didn't know how I felt. She has no clue that I've been so or so Eeyore.
Mm-hmm.
But and she knows. But she was able to say that in that moment, which kind of just again encouraged me that what I'm doing is the right thing. And like I said, I believe that within I don't know how long. I hate putting time frames on anything, but I do believe that this is going to turn into a testimony that I
Yeah.
was willing to do something that I was scared to do, doing something that I thought was stupid, doing something that I didn't want to do,
Mm-hmm.
but I needed to.
Yeah.
And it's eventually, like I said, going to turn into that testimony where I'm gonna be like, this is why. And I tell people all the time, like I have that faith. When I do get a new job, those jobs that I've applied for and didn't get, the interviews that I went to and didn't get,
Mm-hmm.
I know that one day I'm going to be, because I've had this happen so many times in my life, I'm going to be able to look back and be like, that's why.
Right.
Like, because if I had taken that, then I wouldn't be where I'm at. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't have what I have.
Yeah.
If God had let this work out, then I wouldn't be where I'm at. And I think it's a lot of times we are guilty of that regret of, like, I wish things had been differently. I wish I'd
Mm-hmm.
done things differently.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like what you said, nothing at the very beginning, nothing happens, without a reason.
Oh yeah.
And so it's just so important to look at things in that way. It's so easy to look at the past with regret and become depressed.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at it through those, as I tell people all the time, I said, you can't look at things through a physical lens. You have to look at things through a spiritual lens.
Yeah.
Understand that God sees the whole picture. You just see a part of it.
Yeah.
And understanding that everything that you go through, everything that you've been through, God brought you through it because he's going to because he's going to bring you somewhere that you didn't think was possible.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to make all of this stuff turn out into, just think about like a book or a TV show or a movie. When the characters are going through this stuff, they don't understand the outcome, and then the ending comes, and you're like, oh, that's why that happened.
Right.
That's why that's why they had to go through that.
Well, I mean, even the Bible says, like right now you won't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the present moment, you won't understand. You don't understand like why things happen or why they
Mm-hmm.
transpire for, or, it's like, why did that have to happen? Why do we have to feel pain and grief and, things like that? And then you go a year down the road, 5 years down the road, whatever it takes. And then like it all forms together and you're just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, like that makes so much sense. And I mean, I truly do believe, and I've preached this a lot from the stage, that we are our own worst enemies. It's not the devil. The
Mm-hmm.
devil's defeated. I mean, Jesus defeated the devil 2,000 years ago on a cross, and whenever he came forth from the grave, I mean, like the devil is not our problem. It's us. It is our mindset. It's our flesh. It's our lack of faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of different things that works together against us, but. Like I said, I've been on the motivational side of things, inspirational side of things for a little bit now. And it's like, man, I just look at so many things. I just look at so many instances where um, Les Brown, he said, you don't have to tell yourself you can, just tell yourself it's possible. Like telling yourself it's possible gets you into the arena of success. It's possible. What was crazy, he gave an example, and I said it on Facebook the other night, but like this guy named Roger Bannister, is the first guy in history to ever run a sub 4 minute mile. First guy in history, and he done it in 1954. Never had been done before in recorded history. And so, and since 1954, it's believed to be that upward of 1,800 people have ran a mile sub 4 minutes. Well, why? How is that even possible? You had from the beginning of time, in recorded history, that you had one
Some
person.
people could time things.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Right.
whatever the invention of the clock, whatever, like however you want to look at it, but it's like still, you think about that where it's like, one person done it, and then and now it's like 1,800. Why? How? Because you knew that it was possible.
Mm-hmm.
You knew that it was possible. KFC, good old Colonel Sanders, man, like his recipe was rejected 1,009 times. That's insane. 1,009 times, before like literally it caught on, and I think it was at the age of 73 that he sold KFC to a group of investors for $2 million, which in today's time frame would be 20 million. And it's like I thought to myself, what if he would have never went back for that 1,010th or 1,010th try?
Mm-hmm.
What would have happened? I mean, somebody would have made some more chicken somewhere, obviously, but
we have Popeyes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. But
KFC
has 32 upwards of 32,000 restaurants in the world now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there's one guy who literally would not take no for an answer, and that's where like I think that like Jesus, man, Jesus is unobtainable perfection. Okay, like we will never be Jesus, but we can be Colonel Sanders. We can be Les Brown. We can be.
Some would argue you don't want to be Colonel Sanders.
Well, I'm just saying, the ability to accomplish anything is out there. But we have to have that drive, passion, determination, all that good stuff, man, to make it happen. We can't take no for an answer. We can't get freaked out. We can't just go lay in a ditch and die. Like you have to get up, man. You have to take life by the reins and just try to live it to the best of your ability. And the crazy thing is that like Christian wise, Bible wise, like think about the rapture. Think about Jesus Christ coming back. Like whether it be today, tomorrow, 10 years from now, like we don't know. But even set aside from that, Nick, we don't know when our next breath is. We don't know when our next moments are. And we don't know if we're going to see tomorrow or not, or next week. Like that may be dim and grim, and things like that. But it's like you also have to look from the other side of things and think about how precious life is, how precious time is. And it's like, think to yourself, do you want to spend 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years of your life every day, 24 hours a day, hating your life, despising your life, living in darkness, living in fear, living in anger, frustration, brokenness? Or do you want to take the time that you have here and take these moments and be like, I'm gonna make the best out of today. I'm gonna leave it all on the table. I'm gonna go home at night. I'm gonna smile and I'm gonna say, man, I tell you what, like I didn't do everything I wanted to do. I didn't accomplish everything I wanted to, but you know what? I got to breathe. I got to live. I got to walk. I got to do things I wanted to do. And hopefully I get to do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I always say, like if you can't bet on yourself, bet on God. If you have a hard time believing that you're capable of something, then believe that God can do it through you. God is capable of it. And kind of like you were saying, we have so many people. I mean, we see it on social media, we see it on the news. So many people who are quote unquote Christians who just spend so much of their time, effort, and energy putting other people down, or talking about other people, or gossiping, as you said a couple of weeks ago. Like we think witchcraft is, like around a circle, and chanting Latin and, raising demons, but it's really just, Christians sitting at a coffee table, drinking coffee, talking bad about one another. But, it's just, we have so much of that, how much further in your life, how much further could you be with God? How much more successful could you be if you spent all that time, effort, and energy you spend on Facebook as a keyboard warrior, or thinking you're higher and mightier than everybody else, if you actually spent that time, effort, and energy trying to be better,
right?
Like bettering yourself, doing things, investing in things for yourself. Spending more time in prayer than you do on Facebook. It's kind of what I had a conversation with my wife last night about. I was like, how much time do we spend on social media? I was like, I look at my screen time. I was at one point spending 3 to 4 hours on Facebook a day, and I'm like, I said, how much time I spent reading the Bible compared to
7 minutes, and then you're like, I'm tired. I'm tired, man.
And it's just like, or even not even just that, but like playing with my kids, or spending time with my wife, or doing good, positive, encouraging things. But
I'd probably rather scroll Facebook than hang out with her.
It's fun. But I just think it's, again, I think all I'm trying to say is, time, we talk about this on the pod all the time, is, how valuable time is. I think John Acuff, sometimes, he got in this little habit of almost every podcast episode he does. He's a motivational speaker, he's an author, writer, all this sort of stuff, owns a big company. And, he talks about, like, his daughters, I think is what he was talking about. He's like, my daughters are richer than Warren Buffett. He's like, because my daughters have something that's more valuable than Warren Buffett has right now, and that's time.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett's in, I don't know, his 70s, 80s, 90s, something like that. He said he would sell his entire fortune. He would give it all away if he could just get the amount of time that my daughters have left in the life.
Yeah.
Or in life. And it's just like, you can do so much with time if you manage it properly.
Oh, yeah.
If you're using that time for the right reasons and the right purposes, you can do so much with that, and we neglect that because, again, as we've been saying for the past few weeks, we're so short-sighted. We're so focused on the short term and what I can or can't accomplish within the next day or two, that we neglect, that, like, Colonel Sanders spending 1,009 times, going from here, I think it was, the inventor of the light bulb, tried like 9,999 times, and then the 1,000th time he finally created it.
Yeah.
How many times are, we give up much quicker than that these days. If it doesn't work the third day, if we haven't lost weight going to the gym 3 times, we're done. We're
done. Yeah.
If we're Julie's wife and we start Julie's husband and we, start a new diet and it doesn't work after 3 days, then we're done with it.
Shout out
for old Brian, but again, it's just that we get so, caught up in the short term. We think we have, as you always say, we have great plans and horrible follow through. We have all these amazing ideas, amazing plans, amazing, things that we want to do and accomplish. But again, we don't see those results immediately. And so we give up immediately.
Right.
But again, if you just stick it out, I mean, every millionaire, every successful businessman, every, successful comedian or actor, they'll tell you about all the crap that they went through for years, trying and begging and clawing, trying to get people to invest, trying to get people to watch, trying to get people to show up at their shows, trying to get people to do things. And, we always see that over, quote unquote, overnight success, but that's not the case. These are people who have invested their life to doing this sort of thing. I mean, I think what was he? We talked about the other day. I can't remember what it was. Like the average age of a millionaire is
57.
like 57. I'm like 57. I'm 27.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I had that conversation with my boss the other day when I was talking about it. I said, I'm 27. I said I can't sit here. Basically, I was like, I can't sit here and not make more, and not grow, and not have momentum. I said, I'm 27 years old. I have way too much time to be investing in nothing.
Yeah.
And so it's just like you have to be able to look at life that way. You may be. I mean, of course, like I said, I know I'm young, but I mean, like even you 40. You had before you hit that 57. 17 whole years.
Yeah.
That you could do different things, move different ways. Accomplish greater things. And it's just all about using that time because you don't know how much time you have left. And I think that can kind of get a little iffy with Christianity, because it's like we even talked about it before, about you want to live in the moment and enjoy life now rather than wasting time on things that don't matter in the future. Because that is a difficult thing to think about, because we're not promised tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
We could be putting in all this time, effort, and energy doing stuff that's not going to matter tomorrow.
Right.
And so that's why you have to make sure you're investing in the right things. You're not killing yourself in the process. Like that's why I think I joked with you the other day a little bit about like answering phone calls when you're not on the clock. Because it's just like, to me, I'm like, I'm spending time that I could be spending with other things and all these sorts of things. I'm spending doing work. I'm spending doing all these sorts of things. And what if tomorrow was the last day of our lives, and then we wasted this time working where we could have been spending with family and friends and doing things that we enjoyed, but we spent that time working because we wanted to accomplish something today.
Right.
And I was like, you have to be cautious. You have to have that good balance, because if you don't, you will allow work to consume you, and you'll never have that time with your family or your friends. You'll never accomplish anything for the kingdom of God. You'll never, because you're living in the future, not the present.
Yeah.
And so you do have to have that balance. But those healthy habits aren't really going to be bad for you. You have to be able to find that balance, because those quote unquote healthy habits of being a penny pincher or being a workaholic right now, working the job you hate now so you can have a job you love later, doing all those sorts of things now, maybe for naught, because you may not live another year. You may not live 10 more years.
Right.
And you're putting all this time, effort, and energy into something that doesn't matter or isn't going to matter.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to find that balance. You have to be able to find, what's important to you and chase that, pursue that. Because at the end of the day, money, like we talk all the time, money is, in the end of the day,
it's a tool.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
But one thing you can't get back is time.
Mm-hmm.
You can put in all this time, effort, and energy for something, and it amount to nothing.
Yeah.
And so you want to spend that time wisely. You want to spend that time right. You want to spend that time doing what God wants you to spend that time with.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's so important. And I know, again, we've talked about this a lot too, is just finding your passion. Like, what are you truly passionate about? And that's the crazy part about life. It's like, I guarantee you go ask 95% of the people who have a job, it's like, is that the job of your choice? Is that what you're passionate about? Is that what you want to do for the rest of your life? And they're like, nope. It's like,
how many memes and GIFs and videos and TikToks and Reels do you see on Facebook about, like me before I clock in, and you're just like me for the last 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, yeah. And you're just sitting there. It's like, a vast majority of people hate their job. They hate their 9 to 5. And it goes back to, they let that spill over into so many other areas of their life, and kind of go from there. But like I said, I'm happy for you. I'm excited for you. I hope you keep this energy. I hope that hope that you stay the course. And my advice is, man, is don't get rattled, don't get shaken. I know there's the days are clocking down, and and I think too. I'm not saying don't just sit back and not look for anything, but at the same point in time, it's like, don't take just anything. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's one of those deals where, at the right time, at the right moment, man, you'll know, you'll absolutely know. And I think God's going to take care of it. And I think a good testimony is going to come from it.
Amen.
There you go.
I feel like I talked too much and rattled on too long in this
man,
episode.
no,
But
it's all good. Just let you get it out.
next week we're
there
gonna
you
talk
go.
about immigration.
No,
No,
we'll talk about the riots out in California right now. So
Cali's burning.
It is burning, man. Whether it's through wildfires, volcanoes, or just
rioters,
or just rioters, man. California's always on the map for something. So it's kind of crazy.
It's hardly ever anything good.
Yeah, shout out to the people in California though that have hit the download button on People Suck Level.
We're praying for you over there.
We are, yeah. If you're shut in your house right now and you can't get out, hit the download button and we'll help you get through a couple of days anyway. So
we'll make you I feel bad because God, there is somebody in LA that's been listening.
Yeah.
But seriously though, it's kind of like we've talked about, every season is a season. It's that seasons end, seasons change.
Yeah.
Move.
Yeah.
Hey,
feel God speaking.
God is telling you right now to move. But no,
closer to the water.
Further away from the water. Further away from the water. Come inland, please.
Well, there you go.
It's probably better in Kansas.
Yeah.
It's probably a little
never hear much out of Kansas.
Yeah, exactly.
Tornadoes.
You definitely hear crazier stories out of LA than you do,
Topeka
or Topeka, or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, seriously, and I do just want to take a second, because I know a lot of people are, I see it all over Facebook. People are up in arms, this, that, or the other. What's Christian, what's not Christian? Should we embrace immigrants? Should we not? Should we follow laws? Should we not? Should all of these sorts of different things. There's a lot of chaos out there. Even in just the Christian space, there is a lot of chaos, and that's where I think it does become so important to have your own personal relationship with Jesus, not a Facebook relationship with Jesus, not a news station relationship with Jesus, not a church that you go to relationship with Jesus, but a personal relationship with Jesus. As the Bible says, to test the spirits. If you're testing the spirits and you're following what the Holy Spirit wants you to do and you're believing what the Holy Spirit wants you to believe, then good for you. Don't fall for what a political leader is saying. Don't fall for what a denomination is saying about all of that stuff that's going on. Find your own answers to it. Read the Bible, hear his word, find out what he sounds like, how he acts, how he moves, and make your decision about how to feel about all of that way.
Yeah, and don't let anybody else's choices conflict with your peace and with your joy and with your, with your relationship. I mean, I feel like that's a big problem sometimes where it's like we want to be activist, a lot of times. And it's like Christianity is not really about being an activist. It's about finding and forming that your own relationship with Jesus Christ and letting people see that relationship in your life, and then hopefully more people will be drawn to it.
I think a lot of Christians think they're being bold, but they're just being bullies.
Yeah, that's a good one, probably. Yeah, for sure.
It's tough.
For sure. Yeah, it is, and it's a difficult line to walk, because I feel like you want to be bold with your faith. But at the same point in time, it's like, don't use your faith to beat somebody else up in the process. It's like, this, stand for what you believe in. If somebody's coming at you with something like, hey, this is what I believe, like, you're not going to change my mind, but it's not up to me to change yours either. It's like, that's what Jesus does. He changes you. It's like, it's just up to me to live my life in such a way that hopefully you see Jesus in my life and kind of go from there. So yeah, shout out for sure.
It's crazy because it's like, you see so many people using, like, on both sides of the argument or whatever, both of them are using Bible verses against the other side. And it's just like this war back and forth between,
we could talk all day about that, because people, we've seen it. We've lived it, of where, it's like, I'm going to take a Bible verse, and it's like it's like, however, it's like I can take any verse that I want to in the Bible, and I can make it fit any context that I want to. I can take it from the Bible and be like, blah, 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 blah. This is what the Bible says, and true. Yes, the Bible does say that, but in context, with research, with all that around it, it's like, does it still mean the same thing? That's where we get to,
What's really tough is, like, true Christianity. And of course, biggest problem is we're always trying to, we can always do the right thing, but we can't rely on other people to also do the right thing, and so that's what makes it really difficult sometimes.
But people will judge your right thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's right to me is different than what's right to another person, and I guess, like, my personal feeling, what's going to be very difficult is that, like, I feel like as a Christian, you have to be able to not only love the immigrant, but love the rioter, and love the politician,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
love the, like everybody that's involved in that situation,
mhm.
showing them the same love, grace, and mercy that Jesus shows you on the daily.
Yeah, absolutely. But the difficulty in that is that again you
They won't
have
show it to you.
they won't,
Mhm.
and that's because I guarantee you that that people. But then like I think about Stephen, like I think about Stephen getting stoned, and I
Mhm.
think about Paul standing there holding the Pharisees' coats while they're
Yep.
stoning him, like but then
It's funny. I just read that whole spot
right,
today.
right, and then like God totally just transforms him, and like literally sets him on fire to go preach the gospel, and it's like, so that's the thing
But
where
I even think, and I was going to make a post about this today because I was reading that message today, and one thing that stood out to me that has never stood out to me before was the fact that before they started stoning Stephen, they covered their ears,
mhm,
and because they didn't want to listen to what
they,
Stephen had to say,
I was
they
going to
didn't want
say,
to
yeah,
listen,
yeah,
they didn't
yeah,
want to be convicted, they didn't
right,
want they
right.
wanted to be right.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing, man. It's like, and Dr. Phil is very famous for saying this. It's like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Which one do you want
Mm-hmm.
to be? But we are so obsessive about being right, about, our points being heard, our feelings being heard, our situations and we want to be the right ones. We're in the right. And it's like, man, it's to me, it's not about like, again, a huge growth spurt in my personal walk in faith is the simple fact of as long as I please God, I don't care. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care what it looks like. I don't care what how people feel. I don't care what people say. I don't care like my calling is to please God. That's what my calling is. And for us, for each and every person, for each and every church or whatever, at the end of the day, it's like you have to look and say, is what God asking me to do? Am I fulfilling that purpose? Because people are going to change, times are going to change, seasons are going to change,
Laws are
music's
going to change.
yeah,
That's
music's
everything.
going to change, clocks are going to change, like everything changes.
Except God.
Everything changes except God. And it's like if I am praying and believing and connected with God, then nothing anybody else says, does, believes, lives, whatever is going to rattle my faith in who God is or what God is supposed to be doing in my life or through my life. And that's to the point of where I am, man. And like I said, it's a lot more peaceful over here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's a lot more
it is.
peaceful. So but anywho, I mean, I think that would be a good builder maybe if they're still going on. If California's still attached next week,
Right. Yeah. If it hasn't fallen off
if
the
it hasn't,
United States.
yeah, if it's not close to Hawaii,
Floated off.
yeah, by next week, then I mean that'd probably be a good place to pick up and just kind of chit chat about that a little bit. So I know we've almost kept you for an hour today, but maybe you have an hour drive or an hour gym time, or maybe you just want to go lock yourself in the bathroom for an hour and get away from the kids. Either way, so you got an hour
Or
to kill.
maybe LA's burning down around you.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
stay
exactly.
locked in the house,
Yeah, maybe you're watching it all go down from your apartment, and you're like, I
Yeah.
just need a good hour.
It's like, you know what? Curfew just started. I'm going to stay inside.
Tune in to People Suck, Love Them Anyway. So, but no, we appreciate you guys so much. We thank you for hitting that download button and for being a part of the process. And until we see you again, we love you so much and be blessed.